Clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
Is that the potato hat?
That is.
Very nice.
Oh, yeah. My favorite hat.
I threw mine in the garbage after we passed the potato bill. That was just such an Idaho thing to do, that we passed that state vegetable as a potato thing.
Look, it's
Ridiculous.
Where does the ore come from? Tater tot. That was here in Oregon. That was our claim. That's our legacy.
And now Senator-elect Todd Nash is going to try to make the T-bone the state steak.
Do we have a state steak?
We do not.
Hey, I'm supportive. Although, is a T-bone what we want? I mean,
there's questions.
That was discussion, wasn't it, Reagan? We had a meeting this week, and there was some discussion over the T-bone or the ribeye or the fillet, but we could use another fight, because it was the onion or the potato was the fight, right? In the legislature, it was the onion people were upset that we were going with the potato. Thought it was hilarious.
And I sympathize with the onion folks. I think that they had legitimate complaints. Legitimate grounds.
We could make a state root vegetable and have that be the onion. A little more specific.
How about the state foreign car? What would be Oregon's state foreign car? The categories are getting sillier and sillier.
Subaru Outback.
This is what I'm trying. It would be too. It would be the Subaru Outback.
So it would be the Subaru Outback. I would so vote for that.
All right. Well, the voice you guys are hearing is Luke Harkins. He is really the deputy state legislature for House District 10, I think, right? Luke is a mover and shaker. His probably official title is chief of staff, but he throws weight around in the building. He is not your scheduler type of chief of staff. He's a serious policy law maker. Wow. I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think he is.
I appreciate that. I hope that throwing weight around was not a joke about the pounds I put on in the last few years, but
no, I'm sorry, that is not intentional. No, I have those as well.
I'm cultivating that.
On you. Yeah, the pounds grow on you when you work in the legislature. It's just horrid. Freaking cookie.
Yeah,
caucus. I hate cookie caucus.
I've got different jackets and shirts for different seasons. A little bigger for when I get into session. But really, they're just kind of an ascending order. I don't actually ever go back to the smaller ones, so it's a problem.
I know the feeling.
Then short session, I think I've lost like 20 pounds.
Ooh.
And I know, and I need to lose. What do we got? 3 weeks till session starts, so I got to lose another 30 before. Then I can start packing it back on.
I've heard Ozempic is the treatment of choice these days. So
hopefully, Bryan and Luke, hopefully our union brethren are negotiating Ozempic into our coverage for healthcare. But we'll see.
See about that.
Boy. Hey, are you part of the union, Luke? Are you part of that?
You can't ask him that. Oh wait, you're not management, Bryan. I guess you could.
Wouldn't have to keep staff though. You can't. Because you're
chief of staff, you can be part of the union.
Okay,
you can, but your member can opt you out, or you can opt yourself out. And actually, the union is opt in, because I've never had anything taken out of my paycheck from the union, and I never sent them paperwork. So I'm pretty sure, unless I'm completely confused, the union's all opt in.
So yeah, it is, and I just learned that recently. So not to out myself, but I thought it was automatically being deducted from my check, and it turns
Luke is
out
a bad Democrat. He is not joined to the union. He's going to have to send an apology letter with his application.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely have to send an apology letter. But
I would say he's a good Democrat, because he said he was more than willing. He's just like, I figured they were just taking it out already.
Yeah, I'm pretty chill about it. So no, I need to get that paperwork and figure that out. I've sent him an email. So
you told us right before the podcast started that you drove a forklift before you came to the legislature. So you have that working class background that belongs in the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, which again doesn't make any sense why we as legislative workers who are doing anything but electrical and construction work are part of the IBEW. But you actually, I think, are the closest to actually belonging to that kind of a union.
I mean, I don't know if driving a forklift really gets me cred as an electrical worker, but
that's a pretty working class.
Yeah.
That's working class coded, Luke.
Yeah, I got a working class background. I've been a fish processor, a nursing assistant, a forklift driver in a lumber yard for years. So I was a tour guide in Vietnam for a little bit, which is not quite so, that's very left field. But yeah, I've got a little bit. I've been all over the place in terms of.
Wow, Luke served in Vietnam. That's crazy.
You look a little young.
Served beer.
Is that stolen valor? Stolen valor.
Oh. Brian, how many tours did Luke do in Vietnam?
A different kind of tour. I bet
you had lots of tours in Vietnam, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
We're all going to be signing an apology letter to the armed services here shortly.
Yeah, that's coming after the apology letter to the union. What got you to go to Vietnam? I have a really good friend that went to Vietnam a lot, and he travels all the time, and he loves it over there. And he kept trying to get me to go there, and I keep saying no. I have no desire to go there.
It's great. I was working as a fish processor in Alaska, and I went up there, and they paid pretty well at the time for a 19-year-old with no degree and no real career prospects, and I did that for a season, and essentially just took that money and just bought a one-way ticket to Vietnam, and then bought a motorcycle off of a backpacker for like $300. This British guy taught me how to ride it, and then I just cruised around for about 6 months and went over to Laos and spent some time over there as well. But just kind of wanted to before I really got pigeonholed into a career or had all those student loan debt payments that I have to make. I wanted to go and experience the world a little bit, and I've always liked to do some. I'm a big backpacker. Not as much these days, but living out of that little 60-liter backpack and just hiking around. That's kind of the way I like to do it. So
I went. If you would have said it was a long-haired, hippie-looking dude from Bend that sold you this bike, I'd have been, that's my buddy Kurt. Reagan knows Kurt Bennett too, right? Yeah. So and he's a huge backpacker. I mean, he's 54 years old, and I think he's still backpacking. So like literally his whole life is traveling. Like he's traveled around the world, but he ended up meeting his wife in Vietnam and stuff. So he loves that place. He goes back there all the time. And he keeps raving about how great it is.
It's a great spot, and just the friendliest people that I've ever met. I could be lost in the mountains and a family would take me and let me stay with them for the night. Actually happened once. So the level of hospitality and just the kindness over there is just, I would have never expected that. It's easily the best place I've ever traveled.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good story. So obviously cutting fish and processing fish really led you to getting over to Gomberg's district over in Newport and Lake City. And I can work on the coast.
I think so. No, I did a lot of environmental science work for my, in my undergrad there, which I say like my undergrad, like I have a grad degree, but no, I did some environmental science coursework and learned about ocean acidification and hypoxia. And those, are just really nerdy subjects that I felt like not enough people were talking about. And their impacts on, our commercial fisheries, on shellfish, just it blew my mind that this wasn't top of mind. And so I was, I was I'm a non-traditional student. So I was going to school a little bit later in life. And there was an opening for the Coastal Caucus to work for Representative Gomberg as the chair of the caucus. And so I jumped on that as an intern, unpaid intern. I did that for about 6 months. And, I'm an ambitious person and wanted wanted to test my mettle a little bit, and spent a lot of time working with the chief of staff for the office to help on the legislative side of things as well. And then when he ended up exiting at the end of session, I was asked to step in and fill that role. So very unprepared for it, but I was able to get my sea legs.
And so, how long have you been doing that now?
Yeah, so I've been on as his chief since as Rep Gomberg's chief since late 2021. So
Okay.
yeah, so I'll be 4 years with the office next month. So I've heard that in legislative staff years, that's a long time. Doesn't feel
That
like
is a long time. I have done my 4 or 5 years non-consecutively, but it feels like an eternity.
yeah.
I just keep bouncing around, so I never stick still, but that works out pretty well. But it's fun. It's good to have you there. I think it's fun to have staff that, there's such a breadth of people in both, Republican and Democrat caucuses, and really getting to know some of the staff. Because I think the members take a lot of which they should, right? I mean, they're elected members and stuff, but when you get into the details of the workings of the building, you run across some staff that like are really, really, really smart and really know what they're doing, given particular topics or particular things that they do. And it's kind of neat because in the majority party, you get to do something that we normally don't do, is that's actually work for a member with a gavel. So we don't really know what that's like to work for a member that actually can control an agenda in a committee hearing.
To be fair, our gavel is the Transportation Economic Development Subcommittee of Ways and Means. So it's not
The TED.
yeah, the TED
We love
sub.
the TED.
So
Yeah.
it's by the time things get to us, it's been heavily worked. So luckily the workload on my end is not
That's true.
so great when it comes to the gavel. So
That's why we like you, because your head's not so big. So remember,
yeah, no, yeah, I'm trying. I try to stay grounded.
Yeah. So he's actually Speaker Pro Tem now, right?
Not yet. He's the nominee.
Oh, that's right. He's got to get voted on.
Yeah, got to get voted on. I don't think there will be any big shakeups on that come January, but
Reagan's been shopping Vicky's name around, so
I haven't trying to throw me under the bus there, Brian. No, but you make a good point. So Speaker and Speaker Pro Tem, the majority party usually puts up a nominee for both of those positions, but they have to be voted on by the full chamber, whereas party leadership can change hands immediately. Like Drazen is representative-elect, but she is actually still, like this minute, I think, the House Republican leader, but she just doesn't have an office in the Capitol yet until we do the transition here, and then she'll be sworn in. And you guys, if you had changed majority leaders, which you probably should have, Ben is doing a terrible, terrible job for the Democrats, really. He only won 36 seats. That's not even that impressive. It's been done before. So anyway, but if you guys had changed, that would have changed probably immediately, or whatever the timeline was for changing the leader. You don't have to wait for the chamber to meet to change those positions.
Yeah, right. It's just all internal caucus votes. So
of course he did lose less than Julie Fahey did, because she lost 25 seats.
Whoa.
He's done better as majority leader.
Yeah.
I love how people put that stuff into context. It's like, whatever.
No, exactly.
Figured it out.
So the reason I want to have you on, Luke, you and Bryan last year were becoming, buddies a little bit, and you guys were working hard on there. So, the only way I can think to frame this is, people may have heard of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act at the federal level, and then there was also the Inflation Reduction Act, and both of those combined had a ton of federal money that was for different types of infrastructure. Some of it was green infrastructure, some of it was more traditional, and that money filters down and is getting spent by agencies and the different opportunities. But in Oregon, we sort of did a similar thing where we put together some bipartisan infrastructure packages. And even now, if you try to Google for them, as I just did, to find something, you can't really find a lot of info on them. They weren't big, exciting, we weren't changing laws, legalizing something new, that whatever, right? All those exciting things that you get to do. It was very boring stuff. But I think that you guys did some incredible work there. And I kind of want to hear about how it happened. How did Oregon spend a bunch of money on infrastructure and infrastructure for housing, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the housing package was the kind of most recent package we did that was really just direct appropriations, getting money right out the door, getting dirt moved, getting shovels in the ground. But our involvement in that process it really began in 2022 with the then speaker, Dan Rayfield he had selected, we were backing up a little bit. We had a ton of federal money coming in from COVID relief and ARPA and whatnot. And so we had a ton of federal money kind of waiting to be used for public works projects to help kind of stimulate the economy and get some projects done that were waiting for a little bit of cash for an extra lift. And so he had extended an olive branch and selected or actually asked a ton of members of the Republican caucus to solicit their communities, find projects, and let's put together a big rural infrastructure package. And so we were actually the only Dem on that work group. We were selected to come in and not really help facilitate, but just kind of be a part of the group. I think for listeners' context, our part of the state where we represent, House District 10, it's very rural. It's Lincoln County, Western Benton Lane County, so we've got a lot of rural parts, and we've got a lot in common, I think, with a lot of our rural counterparts on the other side of the aisle. So in terms of the issues and the needs of our communities. So we were on that work group, and I got to marvel at, I don't know if you two are familiar with Tiffany Bennett. She was spearheading that as a staffer, and I was watching. Oh yeah, I believe she's with ODOT now, and I was just watching how she's had these big spreadsheets going on and was just aggregating all this data and figuring out what goes where. And I was really impressed. And the speaker had actually asked us back in 23 to do a similar project with some policy involved, but a rural economic development package. And it was about $100 million. And again, we got a team of bipartisan legislators together, Fenley and Scharf and in fact, Weber was a part of that group, Reschke, Owens, Greg Smith, of course. And we put together this whole package with, housing funds, with maritime workforce development, industrial lands that we wanted to get some money to so we could actually utilize those lands for commercial development and attract some more dollars to the rural parts of the state. And super successful. We, had a great time working on that. And then that gave us, kind of an idea, Rep. Gomberg and I, to maybe take the initiative in the 2024 session, as we were talking about housing, to try to kind of merge the pathways here between rural economic development and the housing discussion. And we thought, we're kind of in a housing emergency right now. The governor wants to spend, a ton of money. We want to build 36,000 units a year. And we thought, the best way we can get started doing that now is let's just do what we did with those two packages. Let's survey communities. Let's figure out where the need is. Let's prioritize that need, and let's get money out the door, direct appropriations. So it took a lot of convincing to get that model adopted. But I worked with Rep. Helm's office with Greg Mintz, and he was the math whiz on this. I was the salesman. So we put together this model to rank and prioritize all of these projects. I mean, it was close to $1 billion in projects that we solicited from, all of the cities in Oregon, the counties, special districts, tribal communities, and we ingested all of this data and then tried to rank and prioritize it in a way that made sense, and then make a plea to leadership that this is the path, this is what we need to do to get that dirt moved and to get these projects going.
And so was it through that process that you're building consensus, trying to get this thing passed, that you're going to bring, the high-powered Senator Anderson office into this mix and get Bryan into this project? Because I don't know how else he ends up on it anyway, other than that. I mean, what's the process to bring Bryan into this? And then, Bryan, I've got some questions for you.
Just to back up just real quick, I mean, I think Luke's underselling even though he was the salesman, he was underselling him and Greg's putting together this spreadsheet. It wasn't like they just, oh, let's just look at these things and see which ones make sense. Like they literally created formulas in which you could dump a project in and the output would then rank them. Am I right, Luke? When it basically he was saying like you have all these inputs and then you're kind of taking the politics out of it, at least initially, and just saying if you put this much money in here, you're going to build X number of houses, right? And so it was kind of like this formula, and that was the initial sell. Was, hey, I remember Rep Gomberg came to, I think it was you were presenting this formula, I think, to us, and of course everybody's just like, whoo, right over our heads, and we're like, so it does what? Well, it takes this $1 billion and then you can reformulize it into, if you only want to spend 50 million, what are the top projects? If you want to spend 250 million. And so it really was this brainchild that they pulled together that ultimately took a lot of, I think, the guessing and the politicalness out of it and made it, I think, which really helped us sell it, right, Luke? I think that was really kind of felt the leadership.
At the time, I think there was a discussion on what approach we wanted to take with housing. I know the governor was really set on this programmatic approach to housing. And for those who might not understand what that means, was developing grant programs that the cities could tap into and apply for and then qualify and get that money down the road. But we were of the mind that this session kind of represented an opportunity to really put our money where our mouth is and get money out the door immediately, because we knew what projects were worthy. We knew what projects were ready to go. So why not just cut through that, get the money out the door, continue to work on the programmatic approach, stand that up as a long-term approach to addressing our housing crisis. But in the meantime, we had to staunch the bleeding. So it was above my pay grade that decisions were made, that programmatic approach was pushed off to this session. But it was kind of a 1-2 punch that we pitched it as. Let's get direct appropriations out the door right now that are carefully worked, that are thoughtfully prioritized, that aren't just, like you said, a guessing game of trying to figure out who has the most political juice. And then at the meantime, we can set up this programmatic approach and get all the rulemaking done and make sure that we got a program that works that cities could tap into. So yeah, that's kind of how it evolved.
And I think if you go back to thinking too, in the short session, we also had the governor. She had one bill, which was her housing bill. So right, I mean, that was really her focus. So I think that's kind of how I got roped into it, is because I was mostly working on the housing bill for the SRO and for Senator Anderson, who was the vice chair where the housing bill started. So that's kind of how I got pulled into it. And then we were able to kind of get that thing going in the right direction and then get this thing going. And there was a bunch of people obviously working on it, but I think that it was really like, okay, I think there's some legs here. And then it was just like, now you got to go to work. Now you just got to go get everybody on board. And it was, and then find the right projects, because it always does get political. As much as we say it doesn't, appropriations is always political at some point. And there's some projects that ultimately got pulled in and then got pushed out, because of politics. But I think for the most part, I'd say about 90% of that work was done by you guys and really pulling that thing together. Because I think it was really only a few projects that were kind of shoved around there at the last minute. Really just because we ran out of money. I think that's kind of really what it came to, right? Is like you hit a certain ceiling with cash, or maybe a project didn't quite fit the language and some of those things. And, so it's tough.
Yeah, there was a really good, I think a conversation we were trying to really force with this that wasn't happening before we went into this project was the system-wide and the treatment side of water and wastewater infrastructure. And how that is so instrumental towards building new homes, especially in our rural communities. And really happy that moving forward, it seems like the conversation is starting to acknowledge that. We've had meetings with the governor's office that, when we're looking at building new housing, when we're looking at investing in infrastructure, it's not just that site specific, getting pipes over to a new development, but also investing in treatment facilities and booster pump stations that service the whole network, the whole community. And that not only helps unlock potential for new homes, but also helps preserve homes that could be at risk of failure because they're lacking clean water or effective sewage treatment. So being able to pull that into the conversation, I think, was the biggest win, to the point where we were asked by the governor to come in and redline Senate Bill 1537 and some of the grant funding that cities could tap into to ensure that water treatment could be a part of that eligible process. And of course, that all of my edits I spent so much time on ended up getting amended out, but I'm hopeful, meeting with the governor's office that they're going to be continuing forward with that. And I do have some news to share on that. Moving forward with DLCD and the new framework that they're building. So we can touch on that if you wanted to move on to that, but I don't want to get ahead of you all.
No, I think the only thing, and definitely get on that, but I want to go and let's talk about that. But Reagan, I want you to, and Luke, you're probably good at it as well, explain to the free intern that's listening to our podcast that, because you touched on it real quick, like programmatic direct allocation versus going through the agency route of how funding happens in the Capitol. And I think that's a really interesting, it could be, it really depends on who you are, but interesting discussion of how money actually gets out the door and gets to these projects and why this one was different versus normally going through the agency level stuff. But give us your news first. I want to hear what's going on with.
I was going to say, it's not really news, but I don't think people are talking about it as much. So the Department of Land Conservation and Development, they are actually working on a framework right now based on the work that Greg and I had put together. So we turned over all of our data to them a few months back, and they have been working with some consultants and building out kind of the big boy framework, the actual professional one, not made by two people without any expertise in housing. So
listen, though, I feel like this is sort of the interesting thing. It'll be interesting to evaluate this. I think it'll be good. I think it's Oregon has this problem. We are a small state. And sometimes we act and spend money like big states do. Mm-hmm. Like when you're a small business, you don't get to hire 10 consultants to help you figure out this thing. You just bootstrap it until it turns your business into a big business, and then you can do that. And sometimes I think that Oregon would benefit a little bit more from bootstrapping more things and having more of that bootstrap mentality than it would from going out of control on some of these projects. I'm not saying DLCD is doing that. This is the thing I've been thinking about a ton, all the way back to Cover Oregon, right? We hire Oracle, like one of the biggest, slowest, possibly largest software companies you could possibly get. And I know there were a bunch of Oregon companies where like we could have built what you wanted faster. It would have worked better. It would have been under budget, and it would have had all the security that you wanted. But because of our procurement requirements and all of these, rules, regulations, red tape, those things sometimes get in the way of the really good work that's done by good people. And so I hope DLCD uses as much of what you brought them as possible while adding to it. I think that'll be good. But I do think that we should be encouraging the state agencies and government in general to think a little bit smaller, not in terms of what we can accomplish, but how we do it. We can do it much more streamlined in a way that's going to be effective with people's tax dollars. I mean, this is where you and Greg should get your golden parachutes and go become consultants, and they can give you guys a contract to do it. And it's still going to cost 1/10 of the Wall Street consultants they hired. And that's a great Oregon success story. So anyway, I'm sorry that didn't happen.
If I didn't have so much loyalty to Gomberg, I would have been out the door and
that's right.
Starting my consulting firm yesterday. So
we're all loyal. We're not getting paid enough to be not loyal. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, I think you're right there. I think Greg and I really were like, let's bootstrap this. Let's just try to make the best case. And we figured the only way to get this ball rolling and to have this conversation is to just do it and present a product to people that they could actually see and feel and understand. So
in Shark Tank world, that's called proof of concept, right? Where you're like in front of the sharks demoing. And that is very much, I think, the vibe at the legislature when you go to another legislator or a chair or a presiding officer or whoever, and you're like, hey, I think this will work. And they'll be like, okay, show me the evidence. And then you do your Shark Tank pitch, basically, right? And that's the great thing about this is if there's somebody there that's willing to listen, and you put in the work and you've done it and you've accomplished it, a lot of times in Oregon, I think you do get the opportunity to go forward with that. Not every time, but a lot of times I think you do.
No, absolutely. Yeah. That's why I was saying when Greg and I we were a good pair on this, because he's, not to say he's not a good sales guy, but he's a great numbers guy. I'm not so great at math. So so having me go in and kind of work the process and be able to help sell this thing made us a really good team.
Yeah, I think it matters. I mean, you got to have, and you obviously work for, I mean, I like Rep Gomberg. I've known him a while now, and I think he knows the building, knows how to work the building, and he also allows you to work. And I think when you have members that allow your staff to kind of do their job and maybe explore rabbit holes, because I mean, I know I've gone down rabbit holes and then I come up with nothing, and occasionally, but I think it's good. And also I found that with agencies where, speaking of DLCD, because we wrote a bill, it was the only Republican bill passed and signed by the governor. Republican only sponsors was we asked DLCD, we just threw it. It was like a pie in the sky. We're like, hey, and I think we're talking to Palmer, and we wrote this bill like, hey, there's these old cities, rural cities, that have building codes that go back to like 1976. And
this is the model building codes.
Yeah,
bill, right?
Yeah. So we created this bill, said, hey, DLCD, you do a model building code and let's just give it to the cities and just so they can adopt it, so they all have up to code, up to today building codes. And it was just this idea. We chucked it out there. Palmer sends an email to Senator Anderson, and it's like, hey, can we get together and talk about this? And we're like, yeah, sure. We thought it'd just be, nice try there, Mr. Senator, but we got things handled. We're DLCD, but they were like, no, actually, we think it's a great idea, and we think we can get it done if you guys can get it through the legislature. And so that's all we needed to, start running it through the door. And I think Chair Jama was really great about that one, and and ultimately the governor signed it and she presented it. And it was funny because at the presentation, and she talked about your guys' bill with the $100 million that we did for infrastructure, and she talked about the DLCD bill, and they asked Senator Anderson to speak, and we're like in North Portland, like deep blue, right? Portland, and we're there, and Senator Anderson, and they asked him to speak, and he's like, yeah, sure. So he gets up and he literally says, I just want to thank the governor for signing the only Republican only sponsored bill in 22 years. And you could almost hear a pen drop. Because everybody's like, what? It was so funny. It was almost like she didn't know that it was only Republican sponsors on the bill.
Yeah.
It was pretty funny though. But good bills are good bills.
Yeah. Why weren't we on that bill? I don't even, what happened there?
It's a good question. I think sometimes, where bills people just forget to sign on to them later. Like they didn't think they were going to go anywhere. And then all of a sudden they did. And when people just, didn't open it up and throw their name on it. But it was kind of funny. It was just Senator Knope, Senator Anderson, and then Rep. Reese Iverson. So it was an oddity, but and those are just the people that were on housing that were Republicans, right? So that's how we got it started. And then it just took a life of its own and passed. So kind of fun.
Yeah. It's funny because DLCD, I don't know what's in the water over there, but I feel like every time I talk to them, they're just like, yeah, that's a cool idea. Let's see how it can work. So,
I think I hope this is what I hope is happening over there, that they're running under a mandate from their governor that says this is an emergency.
Yeah.
So, and we've seen so much crap, I will say, come out of, expanding UGBs and opening up land and lawsuits and all the things that DLCD doesn't get involved in. But I think they're trying to figure out in that environment, how do we build homes? How do we get to 36,000 units? How do we figure out how to put sticks in the air within an environment in which you have some people, I would say, on the hard left that want zero building. Like they just want zero building. And I think it's hard to operate in that environment. And I think they're just trying to figure out how to do their job. And normally I would hate DLCD like in years past, but the group that's there now, I think is doing honestly, I think I agree with you. I think they're doing a good job. They're kind of like, how can we do this? Not no.
Yeah.
And I wish other agencies would almost start to take that mentality of, not just know from the get-go. Let's say, okay, let's look into that. That's an interesting idea, instead of just, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I don't want to work on a bill that's going to make their lives harder. So, help me help you is what I say to the agencies.
Yeah. Well, I think we're working on that now with, hopefully that will be a bill that will come to fruition with the Department of State Lands, I think, right? I mean, I think that was
You're talking about the abandoned and derelict vessel effort?
where
Yeah.
we just had that conversation, and I think it was a pretty fruitful conversation of like, hey, like, we want to help figure this piece out, but what does the roadmap look like to help you? And I think it's got to be open to the different ideas, because Reagan and I touched on that. I think it was the last podcast or the podcast, it was last one. State government can work very quickly when it chooses to.
Mm-hmm.
And we can work in a very confined, because we did all of this in short of 5 weeks in the short session.
Yeah.
So we can move quickly if we really want to. And I think that that's really what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Is your abandoned derelict vessel plan just direct appropriations for TNT for ODOT to blow them up, or?
I wish it was that easy.
I don't think we're allowed to
sound.
I
However,
was going to say, there's probably more requirements now. I don't think we're allowed to directly appropriate TNT to ODOT anymore. I think that they use their one chance, and the whale.
With the whales, you can't do that anymore.
Go well.
I think
so. Speaking of that,
too.
Yeah, it did. So speaking of that, you were saying, Brian, that you wanted me and Luke to sort of explain the different ways that money can go out from the legislature, and so I'm going to take the easy one, which is whenever you want a check to just go, you just say, the Department of Administrative Services sends a check for this much to this entity, and it is gone. Okay. Now, that is not the traditional way that we spend money at the legislature. And the reason why is because once that check is printed and mailed or transferred or whatever, that money's gone. There's no way for the state to reclaim that money. If it goes to a project and then that project doesn't happen, the money just stays there, because all it says was the money was to go to this entity, to this city, to this nonprofit, to this whatever. Okay. So that is not the traditional way that happens. However, in the interest of time and speed, if you need money to go out very, very quickly for stuff and you have a high level of confidence in what's going to occur, that will happen from time to time. And it has happened. And we did some of that in the short and the long session last time. And now I'm going to make Luke explain the hard way that money goes out.
Oh, the hard way. So we want to talk about the programmatic versus the direct appropriations approach. I think, Reagan, you really summed up what direct appropriations look like. Sometimes you can put some steps in there, reporting requirements, or you can put some sideboards on it. The programmatic approach is really when you stand up like a grant fund that entities can apply into, and that's there are more assurances that the project is going to get done right, because you're doing your due diligence up front. There's going to be reporting requirements on the back end. There's going to be check-in, but there's also the disadvantage in that it could take 9 months to set up the rulemaking that the agencies have to establish. They have to figure out what the intake looks like for the grant, hire on grant coordinators who can get all the applications, do all the outreach to the eligible entities. One issue that we were really concerned about with the programmatic approach with the housing infrastructure was, do small towns have the capacity to write and apply for these grants? Mm-hmm. And in many cases, the answer is no. They've got a city recorder, and if they have to answer any questions on engineering that need to be answered, they're going to have to go hire somebody, to come in and answer all those questions. And when there's no guarantee that money's going to come out at the end of that grant writing process, and you're having to go in the hole to pay to get those questions answered, it really puts you in a bad spot as a small city. So we really try to prioritize those small cities. And so when we looked at with the direct appropriations, when we looked at criteria to prioritize, one of that was the number of housing units developed per capita. So that had a pretty weighty score. So we could get money out the door to these smaller communities quicker and easier than say some of the larger communities that might not need the grant writing help that could that could easily apply through a programmatic approach. But yeah, with the direct appropriations approach, there is the risk that the project doesn't come to fruition, or it isn't developed in a way that there was that the project was intended. But I think when it came to housing, there was a really there's kind of a backstop there. I mean, these are local governments, these are locally elected officials. There is some accountability baked in, and I think everybody's pulling in the same direction, and they want that housing built so they can grow their community and cynically, increase that tax revenue coming in. And so I think direct appropriations was really a appropriate approach for that first round of funding that we sent out in 24.
Did we on the small city, big city, was it? I mean, did we kind of see like basically under 10,000 is kind of what we're talking about, right? Cities that have under 10,000, and then it gets really bad if they're under like 5,000 because they literally don't have staff. I mean, I've seen cities that was it Representative Lily Morgan is now
she's
the city manager for what's the name of
I think it's Gold Hill. I believe.
Gold Hill. The 4 people.
Yeah. No, she is actually that city is when there were the so for those who don't know, once we got this bill passed, it of course has to get signed by the governor, and the governor can do line item vetoes on these appropriations bills. That means that she can go through and she can say this project dies, and go through and pick who the winners and losers are. So there were 7 projects in our housing package that were potentially in line for being canned. And so I was in touch with Lily Morgan after those potential vetoes were sent out and publicly noticed, and she was just devastated. I mean, she was the big issue for her was they had a lot of questions on due diligence on this project that she couldn't answer, that she would have to go contract out engineers to just come answer these questions. And so the project was just getting more and more expensive by the day, and especially with the further due diligence. And questions were answered. We were able to get her connected with the governor's office and Business Oregon, and all of we were able to save all of those projects. The vetoes were avoided with some more due diligence. But I mean, that was a big challenge for Gold Hill and other cities on the list like Shady Cove and Butte Falls. I mean, these are very, very small communities that quite frankly don't have the tax base to afford these kinds of projects, let alone the technical expertise to apply and be competitive with grants.
And they're usually these smaller towns because those 3 even mentioned, right? They're all outside of Medford. So you have kind of this metro area, and then you have these small communities that people are kind of flocking to. Really, they're just but they just don't have the size yet or the tax base to build out any sort of infrastructure. Usually the county's doing their roads. They're not even, so they don't have a road department. Some of them don't even have police departments. They got, the county sheriff does their stuff. And I think that that's why the direct appropriation route I thought was so important, is to put money directly into those cities so they could actually build 10 homes, 20 homes. And a lot of those were affordable homes, right? Affordable homes that area medium income and all that sort of stuff that we put in the formula. And I just thought it was a really great process, because in those small communities, what we found, just like with the building code bill and then this direct appropriation, I think the same thing, housing is probably their number one concern in those communities is they have a growing homeless problem too, but they don't have the services of any, and they're usually not close to where the county services are. So it truly, the rural problem is a rural problem because you're rural. There's I think that's really kind of the key with it, and that's where I think the coast is like Eastern Oregon and Southern Oregon and the rural side of it, is because even though you're an hour or so away from Eugene, mostly all those places, or Portland or something, but it's too far away for people to go for anything. I mean, they already have to do it for healthcare and all of these things. And we just have to put that into perspective. In Eastern Oregon, we're used to driving, 2 hours to something. It's not that big of a deal. But as the older folks are, what we're finding is in Eastern Oregon, is the counties have to have services that go to the people's homes, because the people just can't get to wherever they're at. And I think that's got to be our next. I think, Reagan, we were talking about at our East. Luke, you obviously have no idea, but we had an Eastern Oregon commissioners meeting that we did, and one of the biggest things that one of the counties brought up was the ambulance stuff, right, Reagan?
The ground emergency medical
Yes.
transportation, and the federal funding and the way it's implemented in Oregon being a challenge, basically.
And it's really tough because if you send, so for instance, if you send an ambulance to transport, so, you know, an old person has a problem at their house and they're in, you know, let's just take Harney County, and they live down by Burns Junction, and that ambulance has to go leave Burns, drive all the way down to Burns Junction, pick that person up and come all the way back. Well, that ambulance is now out of service. Right. And so if you have two of those transports, now your entire emergency system is out. You have nothing. If there's a car accident, you're screwed, because two people are getting an emergency transport at the same time. That is a 3.5 hour round trip. And so it really is a burden on these rural communities, Christmas Valley, La Pine, you know, Lakeview. Think of these places that are really remote. And people, I don't think in the Valley, when you say rural, they kind of think of like Sandy. You know, they don't really think of really remote. Like if you lived in like South Coast, right? If you were down, you know, I don't know, Brookings. I mean, imagine how difficult it is to get from Brookings to somewhere in a hurry, and it's pretty difficult. But their needs are all the same than Philomath, right? So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, small towns, they got big problems.
That they do. What are you hearing on the coast? What's the big problems going on in Representative Gomberg's district right now? Are you hearing from the cities?
You know, housing, of course, is still a huge issue. I think public safety is another big one. You know, I know you're probably familiar. Similar turf, working for Senator Anderson. The Lincoln County Sheriff's Office having issues just having enough officers available to patrol during our summer months, which is causing a whole heck of a lot of issues with you know, with short-term rental market and noise complaints in neighborhoods and just public safety of tourists. Of course, infrastructure is always a huge issue. You know, we've got down in Otter Rock, water system upgrades needed. We've got Glen Eden Beach, the Glen Eden Sanitary District recently. The city of Depot Bay has cut ties with them. And so there's big questions as to how do we afford another $30 million water treatment facility on the coast. So TBD on that one. Of course, we're always working on the Newport Dam and making sure we got funds coming to effectively shore that thing up and build a new one. Otherwise, we're going to see a pretty big catastrophe in House District 10. So, you know, a lot of our problems are real bread and butter, you know, healthcare, you know, consolidation happening, less options for folks on the coast, which is happening all over rural Oregon. And, you know, it's just the bread and butter challenges.
Yeah, and that's the stuff that we heard on this last campaign cycle too, from all the mayors and the councilors and city staff is, I mean, the coast is such a tourist heavy, everybody uses the coast, but everybody from Oregon and everybody who comes to Oregon, you know, and especially the Canadians, I hear like in September, the Canadians flock to the coast, because everybody goes back to school, and then it's like invasion of the Canadians. They say that in Arizona all the time too. It's like as soon as Halloween hits, the next day the Canadians just flock into Phoenix. It's like invasion of the Canucks that happens. And I think they must come to the coast, and then because I didn't realize it, and I was over there October, and all of a sudden I saw so many British Columbia vehicles up and down the coast, and I never noticed it until Senator Anderson told me. He's like, start looking at the license plates and you'll see them. You know,
wow. I've never noticed that.
Yeah, you're gonna look now next year. It's too late now. It's rains there all the time. So
Well, this is topical because today Canada announced its plan to secure its border with the United States. I think that was something that Trump was concerned about, and now that's going to be solved, probably, Brian. So now it'll only be legal Canadians being able to visit the coast instead of the illegal
I'm
ones.
pretty sure they were legal Canadians. I didn't see any desire of them to want to stay. I think the rural Oregon stuff that I really think is we're going to have to figure out, and housing is a big piece of this because we're starting to see, school districts say, hey, we got to find houses for our teachers, right? They can't afford. We've said that you can't get a dentist to want to, open a practice in Lincoln City unless he can find housing for him and his wife or her and her husband. And it's not really the dentist because they can buy the nicer house. It's the other people working in the dental office. Like, how do you find those people, the healthcare stuff? Like, how do you get the obstetrician and those sort of people to, because I think people want to live in small towns, rural communities. I mean, Prineville's, where I'm like, we're one of the fastest growing cities in Oregon. And it's because people don't really want to live in Bend, but they have to do business in Bend or what have you. But so we're having housing challenges. Redmond has, housing challenges because we become feeder communities to these bigger areas. But in the coast, I think it's really economic development isn't going to happen unless, because you're too far away, right? People aren't going to drive into Portland like they can in Prineville. So they have to be based there. And the only way that you can get true economic development is you got to have services, you got to have good schools, you got to have housing, and you got to have, those sort of jobs that come with it will come if you have all those other things. And it literally is a chicken and the egg thing, I think, over there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Economic diversification on the coast is definitely needed. That's why we've been trying to pump some money into maritime workforce and helping to promote our this is a whole other can of worms, but the fact that only 10% of the seafood that we catch in Oregon actually ends up in Oregon restaurants is just a travesty. So trying to capture that value and get more of our local catch into Oregon restaurants and Oregon schools. We'll be working on a bill next session to help OCFA and the Farm to School Network. The OCFA is the Oregon Coast Visitors Association, for those who don't know, helping them work on some projects that they're trying to get more local seafood into the procurement pipeline for our K through 12 schools. There's a lot of interest, but not a lot of understanding as to how to really get this ball rolling.
Is that 10% of all seafood into restaurant, into that, or is that just 10% of?
I believe the number that I've got is that 90% of the seafood we catch, that our fishermen catch, is exported. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the processors, they're chasing value, and that's where the value is. But it'd be great for us to figure out how to kind of have our cake and eat it too, and take advantage of that export market, but also provide an opportunity for our local restaurants and our schools to serve some good homegrown fish, salmon, shellfish.
Good luck getting a 16-year-old to want to eat shellfish.
Yeah, it's
unless you're on the coast.
My girlfriend is, she's very, she grew up in Astoria, and hates seafood. So
right.
But I think it's more a matter of treating it as an educational opportunity and getting the kids early, getting them hooked on seafood early.
Well, what do you think? Before we wrap up here, what do you got? Any predictions going into the long session? What it's going to be a good one, bad one, feel like a long one? Any industry bills or things that you're kind of seeing that is starting to gain traction at all? I mean, I know we're super early, but I'm just curious what you're kind of hearing from your side of the fence.
I think we're cautiously optimistic. Rep Gomberg's not on the transportation committee, which is, I think, where most of the controversy is going to happen this session. I think we've got some would argue a revenue problem, some would say a spending problem, and I think that's where the difference is going to be is going to have to be hashed out. So, but yeah, no matter what, we know we've got a transportation problem, and that's gonna require some really tough conversations, I think. And I'm not too excited about those conversations, but I think they need to happen, and they've been coming to a head for, you know, for I guess you could say decades now.
Well, yeah, we're living off a 1950s infrastructure. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you expect, and I think Reagan, isn't it all Neil Goldschmidt's fault? Isn't that what we decided?
We
Blame it
did
all.
decide that he's responsible for traffic not moving through Portland very
That's
fast.
right. That's
because
right.
he
That's who we're
did
blaming.
kill an additional interstate or something along those lines way back when, which would help. But I think the other thing with infrastructure, part of it is, yes, we have a state problem with infrastructure that we have to reckon with, and it was exactly what you explained. But when was the last time the federal government invested heavily in infrastructure? I mean, I think the largest infrastructure investment on a per capita basis, or not inflation adjusted basis, would have been Eisenhower when they started the highway system and the interstate system. So I think that a lot of these states are all going to have the exact same transportation problem that we have. They're all going to try to deal with it in different ways. I think some will be more successful than others, but ultimately, most of the 50 states, or at least the 48 contiguous, are going to need help on the transportation side. And it'll be interesting to see if there's a big push at some point, either in this administration or the next one, to figure that out at the federal level. Because I think, the one time we were always talking about federal funding is related to the I-5 crossing and the Columbia River, the previously named Columbia River crossing. And the legislature got together and we said, okay, we'll put the money forward, but we're basically putting all of the due diligence. And if this thing screws up on the treasurer, which was Ted Wheeler at the time, and he was like, nope, nope, and nope. I don't want to be responsible for that. And then there was Washington had a more conservative Senate at that point, and so they weren't as big on the light rail part of it. And so the whole thing fell apart. And we're back here now, 10 years later, both sides talking, both parties talking, both sides of the river talking, and they're going to build it, but it costs like $10 billion more. Not quite, but pretty close. And so the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets. And we've been waiting a long time on infrastructure, particularly roads. But don't worry, the Portland transportation folks, the bicycle folks, their mantra is, where we're going, we don't need roads.
Back to the Future. I think
That's right. I love
the one thing I love about transport, and I think you're right on transportation. I think it's going to be a big discussion, and but it is the one thing that there's other things we can invest in, but it does. There's a direct correlation to commerce and return on investment when you invest in infrastructure, just like what we spent a lot of time talking about with wastewater and sewer lines and pump stations. And I mean, those things last for a long time. And then when we invest in physical assets, I think Oregonians, Republicans and Democrats are way better okay when they feel like they're getting an investment in an actual physical asset. And I think that roads are part of that infrastructure. And I'm more apt to, if I'm going to vote for a property tax or something like that, which, we get a few of them over here, not many in Eastern Oregon, but if I'm never going to vote for a school district on a property bond measure that is just going to replace the roof, I'm like, well, you should have saved for it. Now, if they need to build a new school because there's more students than they can cram into those classrooms and they've outgrown their space, I'll listen to that argument and I'll vote for that. So because I'm getting a whole new building that I know is going to be able to serve a generation of kids. And I think with road infrastructure, I think they really have to approach it from the standpoint of, if we're going to, don't just tinsy build something for the long term. Give us, because if you're going to take a bite at the apple, I always say you might as well take a big bite, because or if you're, like we say in the legislature, if you're going to take a bad vote, or you might as well make it one vote. Try not to make it 3 votes. So I think that nobody, Democrats or Republicans, want to raise taxes. I don't think that's. I don't think there's some Democrats that do, but I think most don't want to. But I think there's no way to get the money to do the road infrastructure that would truly make a difference without raising taxes. It's just kind of where and how, because everybody's got a need, right? I mean, we've seen, if you drive to the coast, every one of those roads going to the coast needs upgrade.
Oh yeah, big time.
You drive over the mountain pass, every one of those mountain passes needs work, and those roads aren't cheap to build. So, it's a lot. And Portland has their hand out, and they got a ton of problems in Portland. And I don't know their problem. I think that's going to be a real problem. I don't even know how to move people through Portland, especially trucks and stuff, without impacting an enormous amount of people.
Yeah. Well, hey, I wanted to bring it full circle back to what kind of why I'm on here, and you mentioned it was the kind of bread and butter, the infrastructure, water, sewer, all of that stuff is so critical and so important to just the functioning of our communities and our society here and anywhere. And Reagan had mentioned early on in this episode that if you try to Google these rural infrastructure packages, you're going to have a hard time finding much on them. And part of that is that we suck at marketing. But another part of that is that, quite frankly, people take for granted that when they flush their toilet, the water goes down. And that requires immense amount of work and capital and negotiating and at the political level to happen. And I think us as staffers, Republican or Democrat, I don't think too many of us think of our counterparts across the aisle as enemies. I mean, 90% of the work that we do is bipartisan. It's bread and butter issues. We get hung up on kind of the 10%, and but people should know that that infrastructure, that flushing your toilet, having the clean water come out of the tap and dirty water go down the drain, that's takes a lot of work and a lot of money to get there. And so I appreciate you having me on for that.
Yeah. I will say, Luke, your point about that too, and we kind of, Bryan and I and Representative Everson covered this on the last episode. We all have that shared experience of being staff, and I never look at dealing with another legislative staffer as like a partisan thing. In fact, I get weirded out when another staffer acts partisan. I go, what is your problem? Like, that's our boss's job, to play those roles, to do what they need to do, to represent their constituents, to hold to those issues. Our job is like, get the work done, figure out how to get the work done, figure out how to help our bosses. And sometimes that puts us in partisan positions, but I never looked at staff level work as partisan. The enemy, state agencies, duh.
I was going to say the Senate, but no offense, Bryan.
It's always the other chamber's fault, especially if your bill doesn't pass. If you do all that work, there's nothing worse than getting all the work and getting it to pass your chamber for it to die. And the other one, you're just like, yeah. It's just the worst because you put in so much effort, and then you go back and you just like, I can't believe the House couldn't pass that fucking. Or the other way around, right? Yeah. Lot of fun stuff. Well, I look forward to a fun session. We're going to make it fun. I'm bringing my mustache.
Yeah.
For the whole session. I may even color it a different color just to mess up everybody. And then
listen,
our mustache contest.
This is a plug to go to crosstabs.studio, because if you get the episode in your podcast player, you won't be able to see the picture, but I'm going to put a picture of Bryan maybe in the email that goes out from Substack. And so if you go to the crosstabs.studio or you get the email, you'll be able to see the picture of Bryan's mustache that he is bringing to the legislature. I'll take another one, Bryan, without the glasses, so you can put your best foot forward there. But
right. I know I got a face for radio. It's all good.